Everybody, welcome back to the Top Notch Leader. My name is Terence Colson. This is episode 13. Today, we're going to be talking about the B in Vibe. We talked about values-based organizations. We talked about inclusion and respect. And today, we're going to be talking about building trust. No, I wasn't just trying to shove trust into the Vibe acronym. The key operative word here is build. We're going to go over how to build trust in your organization so that it can thrive. Okay? One thing I need you guys to realize is that we've talked a lot about high performance teams and building a high performing team. You cannot do that if you do not build trust. So it's going to be super important. All right? Make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, make sure you sign up for notifications so you know when new episodes are coming out. Tell a friend about the podcast if you think it's valuable, and let's get after it. Okay, so building trust. How do we build trust? Why is it important? All that stuff. We're going to go over that. What I need you guys to understand is that without trust, in general, you're going to get compliance maybe, right? If you're lucky and you got good people on your team, you'll still get compliance. But if they don't trust you, if you don't trust them, if they don't trust each other, you're not going to get commitment to the team, commitment to the mission, etc. And that's really what you need in order to create a high-performing team. So we're going to give you everything you need today to start building trust and start building that rapport so that you can make sure that your team continues to climb and climb and climb. All right, so I want to start off today by kind of defining transparency, right? In the context that we're talking about it. I'm not going to give you the Merriam-Webster definition. We're not trying to be cliche here, right? But in the context of being transparent with your team in an appropriate way and using that to build trust, this is kind of what I'm talking about. Really all it is kind of showing your cards. You can think of it that way, right? Sometimes that means being a little vulnerable, but a lot of times it means not having to be vulnerable. So don't freak out at the idea of that, right? At the end of the day, being transparent just means giving more information to your team than is really required. A simple example is like, if I need Becky to work an extra shift next week, I can just say, Becky, I need you to work an extra shift next week. And then Becky can take the shift or not. And what if she doesn't need the money, then why take the extra shift, right? But if I have the foresight and I'm a transparent leader, then I can approach it with like, hey, Becky, this situation came up and so-and-so has a dental appointment or an emergency or whatever going on, and it's going to put us short, but that's also a super busy day. I can't afford to be short that day. Would you mind picking up that extra shift? That's going to create a situation where she trusts your decision-making because she kind of understands where you're coming from, and she understands that you're trying to take care of the business and take care of the team. It's going to build trust. It's going to build her trust in you, and then she's probably more likely to take the shift. But even if she doesn't take the shift for whatever reason, that interaction is going to build a little bit of trust. And you take those things and you use them like a brick, and then you slowly build a wall or a building or a fortress of trust, however you want to take that analogy, right? So a lot of people out there think that being transparent is like a weakness, right? Why do I need to tell everybody everything about everything? They don't need to know all that information. It's going to slow everything down. It's going to bog the systems down. We're not doing that here. Okay, I get where you're coming from. That's not what we're talking about, okay? You don't have to give everybody unadulterated access to everything, but it's also not a weakness, right? If you are transparent with people and you give them more information than is required and you give them enough information to get buy-in to a task or to the work or whatever, that is confidence in action, and it's just going to build your rapport with them, and it's going to make that bond stronger, right? So definitely a strength, definitely not a weakness. Anybody that automatically goes through like, hey, I have to hoard information in order to feel important, you got to figure out what's going on in your own professional life so that you don't rely on that, because that's really like relying on positional authority, and it's not going to get you or your team very far. And so just something to think about. So let's go into why transparency actually builds trust and how it builds trust, right? Because I could just say it builds trust, but if I don't explain it to you, I feel like I'm wasting your time. So for starters, when there's an information gap, people naturally will fill in those information gaps with their own thoughts, opinions, feelings, etc. And unfortunately, the default is negativity. They fill that information in, especially in a work environment, with negative information, right? As in like things that we would perceive as a negative attitude, or things that are like, my boss failed me, or the organization didn't plan, or almost like worst case scenario type stuff. What you have to realize as the leader is this isn't the individual just being whiny or being complaining. This is a defense mechanism. They naturally, whether they know it or not, and whether they acknowledge it, it's kind of something that makes them feel uneasy in one way, shape, or form. And so the defense mechanism is to put that negative stuff in there. That makes you, or makes somebody else, or makes something else the villain, and therefore they get to become the hero. So on that more like deeper level in their heads, that's kind of what's going on. If you can avoid the information gaps, then you minimize the negative filling of those gaps, right? Openness, on the other hand, eliminates confusion, which can lead to anxiety, which can lead to feeling like I need to feel safe, which can lead to, right, that lack of trust, or filling in gaps with that negative mindset. But it also creates psychological safety. You know, we've talked about creating a space that is psychologically safe for you and your team. You got to do that. And this is one of the ways you can do that. Being transparent, giving people more information than is required. Okay? That's why transparency builds trust, because they start to feel psychologically safe. And then as they feel safe, then they become more attached and more connected and more emotionally involved in a good way with the organization. A lot of times when you have a consistent feeling of, I'm not getting all the information, people start to get suspicious. It's almost like they feel like they're getting duped, right? Like, is there a specific reason? People aren't telling me stuff on purpose. What's going on here, right? And I deal with that on a regular basis, whether it's people feeling that way because I don't have the information to give them, or me feeling that way because other people aren't giving me the information that I feel I should definitely have access to, right? So in feeling duped, then that sense of like, what's really going on that I'm not aware of starts to settle in. And being transparent is going to eliminate that feeling of like, am I being essentially betrayed, or am I right? Am I being played here? You're removing that by being transparent. And you might not remove it entirely, but you're at least removing it when it comes to your actual team. And then that dynamic between you and the team, or you and the subordinate, right? Or you and the team member, okay? I know I use subordinate a lot. I don't mean it in like a derogatory way. It's just a natural thing that I do. So sorry if it makes you feel weird. All right. But being transparent removes that feeling of like, am I being played? But it also builds credibility with you specifically as the leader who is being transparent. And even when you tell them this information, they might not agree with the decision that you made or the information that you have to give, but they'll respect you because you're being honest with them, and they can tell that you are being genuine and being upfront with things. And that is huge. All right, so an example of this for me is when I was on recruiting duty. I was on recruiting from 2018 to 2021, and what I found is the people that trusted their recruiters the most were more likely to join the Army. Now, I'm not here to get into, was my recruiter honest with me? Did they lie to me? You should be honest if you are a manager of any kind of funnel, whether that's recruiting, whether that's management, whether that's sales. That's my disclaimer, okay? But those people, those applicants that trusted their recruiter, that trust was built from transparency like we're talking about today. When I wanted to put somebody in the Army, or when somebody wanted to join the Army and they were going through me, I tried to be very honest and I tried to be very transparent about, this is the process. This is what's going on. This is how long it's going to take. Hey, we had a hiccup here. This is what we're doing to get around it. All those kinds of things. Yes, there are lots of good things about the Army. Hey, there are some things that suck about the Army because it's a job and no job is perfect. So don't think it's going to be rainbows and butterflies. That transparency is what built trust. And that trust is what built commitment. And literally, from a recruiting standpoint, that is what got people to commit to say, yes, I will join the Army, sign the contract, and then get on a plane and drive, and then get on a plane and fly to basic training. Okay. So just something to think about. This stuff works. And there's all kinds of examples in my own life that I've seen that have proven this out, where being transparent and building rapport and building trust creates buy-in. All right. So next, what we want to talk about is, what does transparency look like in action, right? There's a couple key categories where I think you can take advantage of and you can take action in the moment of being transparent with your team so that you can build trust. All right. One, decision-making. Okay. When you're making a decision or you're going through the decision-making process, explaining your thought process or explaining where you're coming from or why you made the decisions that you made can exponentially have returns on that trust quotient. All right. It builds like a shared purpose, and it allows them to much more easily have buy-in and really latch on to the decision that you make, and then own it at their level and implement it at whatever level they're at. Okay. So decision-making, this is how I came to this decision. This is why I came to this decision. And then being open to getting some feedback or answering a couple of questions about that decision, right? Well, that affects my department this way. What's up with that? All right, I took that into consideration, and this is why I ended up making the decision that I made. Or, hey, honestly, that was an oversight for me. I will look at that, or the team will look at that, and if we need to reanalyze and do some things and make some adjustments, we'll make some adjustments. Okay? That's not me telling you need to backpedal on your decision-making every time somebody asks a question, but it is me telling you that you need to be open to the idea and genuinely respect feedback and then do with it what you deem appropriate for your organization, right? But transparency is key. This is why I made that decision. The second area where this is relevant is in problem solving, all right? So when you are solving a problem or when you've identified a problem that's on the horizon or you're currently dealing with, letting the team in early and just saying like, hey, this is the problem that we're trying to solve, or this is the problem that we have identified and we're trying to come up with a solution for this, like that's going to build trust. Those are the moments where it might feel a little vulnerable, but it's also going to remind them and it's going to show them your humanity as a leader. And it's going to take you off of this potential view of being like on some pedestal where you think the world is honky-dory and you're out of touch, right? And so let them in early when you're problem solving, but also ask for input because they're going to give you feedback. And if they trust you, they will give you better feedback. So building this trust is huge, right? But using that feedback is going to help you with finding solutions to these problems. When people help create solutions, they own that solution. And so if I get input from somebody and that input is maybe 2% of the solution, well, that's ownership for that individual when they see the solution implemented. Can really pay dividends. All right. And then the third one is conflict resolution. Whether it's in whatever arena, in whatever category, when you're dealing with some sort of conflict resolution, you can be transparent about stuff, right? You don't want to dodge tough talks, whether it's, departments being at odds, funding being an issue, whatever it is, individuals underperforming, individuals maybe overperforming and compensating for others, whatever you're dealing with, don't dodge or avoid those tough conversations. Being transparent about the conflict that exists and transparent about your desire to resolve that conflict, it's going to bring a sense of fairness and consistency as long as you're treating everybody the same, right? Which is kind of an implied thing. You should be treating everybody the same, equally and or equitably, depending on the application of those words. But transparency is going to bring that fairness, and it's going to bring consistency, and it's going to help everybody get and then stay more aligned. So you want to do that. So 3 areas: decision-making, problem-solving, conflict resolution. So as you go through and you start to implement these things in those 3 and then other areas of your professional life, I think what you're going to find is that transparency and accountability, they really feed off of each other, right? And so when I'm transparent and I own my truth, what I'm actually doing at the same time is I'm giving others permission to do the same thing, which also feeds into that accountability machine that we've talked about before. And that higher level of accountability, when coupled with trust, is going to want everybody to achieve a higher standard, and it's going to elevate things, right? But if the trust isn't there and the transparency isn't there, then the other things are going to start to fall apart. All right, so a couple of reflections, some things I would love for you guys to think about, okay? I want you to answer these questions, and then I want you, like, either in a journal, you could do it in your head, you could do it on your phone, but what I want you to do is kind of answer these questions for yourself. You ready? Here we go. What does transparency look like in your day-to-day leadership? What are you doing? Like, what are you doing to be transparent? And you'll have moments like, I don't intentionally do this to the point of like, okay, today I'm going to be transparent 3 times. But when I have a moment of transparency, I can feel it, and you'll be able to feel it. So ask yourself, like, what does it look like in your day-to-day leadership? And then specifically with that question, how do the things that I'm talking about today and that we're going over, how can you directly apply that? So apply the situational context and be like, I can be transparent in this area or this area or this area, okay? So I want you to do that. Also, how do you balance openness with confidentiality? Now, we're going to get into that in a little bit, but I want you to think about that. Another one is, what challenges come up when you try to be more transparent? I know we talked about, am I being too transparent? Is it TMI in the professional sense? But also, have I turned it into a situation where everybody expects me to tell them everything and every little detail that I know, and it turns into just spilling the tea? Whatever that looks like. But I want you to try to identify what are some potential challenges that come up when you try to be more transparent. And then number 4, how do you handle a situation when people aren't ready for transparency, right? You try to give them more information, or you try to do whatever, and maybe it's your leader, or maybe it's one of your peers, or maybe it's somebody on the team that's like not ready to receive that or get on board with that. How do you handle that? So take those questions, reflect on those, see how you can apply them in your day-to-day life, see how they affect your day-to-day life, right? And I want to kind of transition from there into the thing we just alluded to, which is that there's a balance, and there should be a balance between transparency and confidentiality. So transparency doesn't mean that you say absolutely everything unfiltered, right? It means saying enough, which is more than it's required, but you're saying enough to create clarity and confidence. And so we're going to talk about kind of striking that balance a little bit next. Sweet? So the next thing I want to talk about is confidentiality, right? Or like, what do we not share? And then how do we balance transparency, like we've been talking about, and confidentiality? Because you're going to need both in some or many scenarios. You can't just word vomit everything. And some things need to stay private, right? The key when it comes to balancing transparency and confidentiality is explaining why things need to stay private. And usually if it's like a category of things, right? I'm in the healthcare industry. And so anything involving patients, it's just known that anything involving patient medical information or health information, that's protected, and we're not going to talk about that or identify that. Those are the types of things You don't have to explain it every single time. But in general, you can talk about, hey, I'm not going to talk about this because bleh, whatever the answer is, right? Or, hey, I'm not at liberty to talk about the why, but this is what's going on, and I will tell you everything that I can tell you, right? Again, this is where people will be like, well, that's a cop out, or people aren't going to believe that or whatever. And I'm telling you, when you do this, if you have a foundation that you are honest with people and you are transparent with people in general, and you've built that reputation, when you say this, not only will they believe you, but that it will add to, okay, I trust him, right? This is another moment of him showing that he is trustworthy and I trust him, and actually acting on that trust and being like, even though I don't have all the information, I'm going to follow you through whatever situation we're dealing with, right? And so something simple is like, hey, I can't share all the details, but here's what I can say, is an easy way to balance that, like transparency and confidentiality, right? Transparency is about, another thing that I think people don't realize is that you being transparent about boundaries still builds trust, right? And this confidentiality piece, or this, hey, this is what I'm not going to talk about or what I can't talk about piece, is a perfect example of that, right? Like, if I'm trying to build trust, but I'm honest about where there's a line where I will not or cannot talk about things, now I'm creating a clear picture as to what's in bounds and what's out of bounds. And that creates a comfortability as far as psychological safe space that we talked about earlier, right? So transparency about boundaries will still build trust. Now, transparency is really a form of kind of articulating respect for somebody else, right? When you're transparent with them. And so having that respect and that transparency, add discretion to that kind of mixture. And really what you get is a display of maturity in leadership. Hey, I'm able to still have boundaries and follow boundaries and play in bounds, but I can do that and not just cut other people out or not communicate with other people because they're not privy to the information that I have, or I'm not privy to certain information that they want, right? So maturity in leadership is displayed through finding this balance, transparency and confidentiality. So as leaders, there's some things that we can kind of run into, right? There's some challenges we can face, and there's some of these that I just want to talk about so I can maybe give you some tips on how to overcome these challenges, right? Fear of judgment is one of them. So maybe you've got a fear of being judged for being transparent. Maybe it's judged by your peers, judged by your leaders, judged by the team, whatever that looks like. Maybe it's, hey, did you hear her tell the team that she doesn't know what to do in this situation and she's trying to figure it out? Oh my gosh, that's crazy. She doesn't even know how to do her job. Yeah, that might be some of the side talk. That sucks. And honestly, that's kind of toxic. But one thing you can do, right, is like understand that if you admit uncertainty and then you follow that up with work ethic and with self-development and with more honesty and with more transparency and a deliberate effort to take care of the team, like, they're not going to lose faith in you. They're going to gain faith in you. They're going to build trust over time. And we're talking about building trust. Okay. So you show up and you're like, hey, I have no idea what I'm doing. I just got thrown into this job. It's like, yo, what is going on? But as you build that reputation and that rapport, they're going to come to appreciate that also, because you are honest with them, you're transparent, and so they know that they can follow you. Another challenge that leaders might run into is time constraints. You might be in a situation and you're like, man, I don't have time to tell the team more information or go more in depth with stuff because we're going to miss a deadline or we're going to get behind on this project. Okay, sweet. I understand that, and I can definitely relate to that. What I want you to try to do is find a middle ground where you can still provide enough information and you can still provide more information than is required, but not so much to where like they don't get anything done. You give them enough information, and really where you want to strike that balance when you have a time constraint is get right to the point where giving them X amount of information prevents misunderstandings, prevents mistakes, prevents having to redo work, because those things are going to cost you time in the future. And so if you can invest the time now to get dividends on that time later, perfect. Now you've gotten a return on your time and you're not actually wasting it, you're maximizing it. So time constraints, try to find that balance, okay? And I know we're all in different situations and different time constraints can mean different things, but try to make that effort and it'll work. A third challenge that leaders might face is cultural resistance. You might listen to this episode and your eyes are open and you're like, man, I'm going into work. I'm increasing transparency. We're going to build trust. We're going to do great things. You get there and they're like, yo, we've never done it this way. We don't want to do it this way. All right, maybe it's your peers. Maybe it's your leaders. Maybe it's people that you lead. And they're like, yeah, I don't like this. It sounds very like touchy-feely or very much like kumbaya. We just want to get the job done, right? We do things a certain way and we like it that way. But you're convinced that this is a way to build trust, and building trust is how you build a high-performing team, and you want your team to be high-performing. So how do you now get around this? You can just start to demonstrate this in small ways, bite it off in little chunks, demonstrate it. I love to do this in general with things, right? Is create a proof of concept, okay? You do it in little bite-sized, digestible chunks. And then people are like, oh, that works. Cool. And they move on with their life. And then the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth time that it works, they start to catch on that, oh, okay, I'm now starting to see that works. And then as you model it, the idea is that they start to have some buy-in, and then other people start to get on board with being more transparent and being more honest with each other so that you guys can build trust mutually. You just got to remember that transparency isn't an announcement, right? You're not like, attention, 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 transparency announcement, right? You're not doing this for like tick the box, how many times was I transparent today, right? It's really a behavior shift. You want to try to model that, and you want to try to demonstrate the behavioral and the mental shift of like, I'm just going to be more transparent in the way that I conduct business, and then let that kind of permeate and get into the fibers of your team. Now, I've dealt with this cultural resistance situation myself. About 12, 15 years ago, I had a commander come up to me and he was like, hey, I just want you to know, I think you're too nice to your people. And I was like, what are you talking about, sir? Like, I push them to do great things and to execute with excellence. Like, that's what we do here. And his response was, no, you're doing a good job. I just think you're too nice to them. Like, your job is to get the information from us, digest it, and then come up with tasks for them to execute so that the larger mission gets accomplished, right? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. He goes, you can just tell them to do the task, and they should do the task without asking you questions. They shouldn't be requiring all this extra information you're giving them. They should just do the task because they were told to do the task. My response was like, okay, yes, to a point. But if I give them more information, that's less questions they have to ask later, and it saves my time and it saves their time, and they can just go do the thing. And then there's things like implied tasks that they can come up with on their own, so I don't have to like deliberately tell them to do that thing. So it saves me time in the long run, which is kind of something we talked about earlier, right? And he was like, all right, man, do your thing. Like, whatever. I'm just telling you that's what I think. I say, I appreciate the feedback, sir. If there's anything I need to actually improve upon because I'm not meeting the standard, I don't want you to think that I'm not open to that. He was like, no, you're good. Keep doing the thing. So fast forward for 6 months, as I started to model this, other people started to model it. And then you start to see this trust get built, but you also see people willing to be vulnerable, willing to be transparent when they don't know something or when they're struggling with something. And then the level of execution goes up and up and up and up. And I'm telling you, this commander came up to me at the end of his command, and he was like, you remember when I told you were too nice to your people? I said, yes, sir. He goes, I was wrong. You were not too nice. You're doing great things. Keep doing what you're doing. And for me, it was validating, right? I was like, oh, thank you, right? But it's proof that if you do these things, you will see a positive shift in your team's performance and your leadership. But that's enough about me. Let's talk about some practical takeaways for you. Here's 5 ways for you to build some trust through transparency. All right. 1, explain the why. We were talking about that. Context creates clarity. If you create clarity, you are going to build your reputation. You're going to build trust. You're going to allow people to feel like they can see the landscape and they can understand it and they can navigate it better. And you're going to eliminate them filling those information gaps with negativity. 2, share wins and share failures. Openness builds credibility. Okay? Openness. It's okay to fail. It's okay to not have an answer, right? Now, you have an obligation to do the best that you can do in that leadership position. As long as you're doing that, when you bring the fact that you are human back into the picture, you're going to find that you're building your own credibility and you're building trust in the team. 3, I want you to admit mistakes quickly. Old news. Bad news does not get better with time, okay? You want to model accountability. If you model it, then they can follow it. And they're going to be more likely to hold themselves accountable when they make a mistake if you show that vulnerability and you are transparent about those things. All right. All right. Number 4, ask for feedback. Now, yes, ask for feedback in general, but you can ask for feedback as far as like, hey, when can I provide you more information and more context to things? And what are some areas where like you don't need the context or you don't need the additional information? You just need kind of the meat and potatoes. You need the stuff that's required, and then you can move. And they will help shape your transparency style and the areas where you're more transparent and more forthcoming with information versus things where it's like, hey, we're gonna run and gun. Here's what I need you to do. And they're like, yep, got it. And they move on, right? Number 5, be consistent. Trust grows from repetition, right? You do things 1 time, 2 times, you do something once every 2 or 3 months, it's not going to work. Okay. If you're consistent about things, then that trust is going to grow. If you are consistently transparent, 1, it's going to become easier, and 2, it's going to take root, and that's what's going to help build that trust between you and your team. So when you do all of these things, right, and you make transparency kind of a rhythm and something that happens on a regular basis and is integrated in your day-to-day stuff, trust, and that trust that's built and that bond that becomes tight is going to set you apart, and it's going to give you that edge over other teams, over other leaders. All right, so here's some things that I want you to think about. I want you to kind of ruminate on. All right, so listen to them. You can write them down. You can use them as you're leading your teams, but I think these are super powerful. All right, trust isn't built through perfection. It's built through honesty. Transparency doesn't expose weakness. It amplifies strength. When leaders are open, teams become accountable. Every transparent conversation is like a deposit in your team's trust account. If your people don't know the why, they're going to make up their own, and it's probably not going to be flattering. All right, so let's recap. Transparency builds trust. Trust builds alignment. Alignment builds performance. And so if you want to build a high-performing team, you have to build trust. And transparency is how we're going to do that. Transparency doesn't mean giving everybody all the answers, right? It means giving them access to your thought processes, access to your reasoning, access to your humanity, access to your leadership journey. Those are the things that you're giving them access to, and it's going to help build that trust. Building trust through transparency is what we wanted to cover today. So hopefully we did that. Okay, that's the B in vibe. So I hope you got a lot out of it. Like, subscribe, sign up for notifications for the podcast. If there's a leader out there that you think could help use this information to build trust in their own organization or for themselves, by all means, please share it. We want to get this out to as many people as possible. Okay. Thanks for tuning in. And until next time, lead boldly, lead transparently, and lead with purpose.